In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where everything looked picture perfect, life moved at a steady and predictable rhythm. The streets were lined with rows of identical houses, each with manicured lawns that seemed to compete for the title of most pristine. Mailboxes stood in perfect alignment, painted in neutral tones approved by the Homeowners Association, HOA. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, or at least thought they did, and followed the rules without question. At the heart of this community was Karen Miller, a woman who took immense pride in being the unofficial guardian of order. To her, the HOA handbook wasn't just a set of guidelines. It was a sacred text. Every day, she walked through the neighborhood armed with her clipboard, jotting down infractions like overgrown hedges or cars parked too close to fire hydrants. Her sharp tongue and unyielding attitude earned her the nickname HOA Karen, though no one dared say it to her face. While some residents appreciated her dedication, others found her constant policing exhausting. But love her or hate her, there was no denying that Karen ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist wrapped in a pair of gardening gloves. Just 2 streets away lived Eleanor Thompson, a retired Supreme Court judge whose name carried weight far beyond the confines of the sleepy suburb. In her younger years, Justice Thompson had been instrumental in shaping landmark decisions that influenced the nation's laws. Yet here, among the neatly trimmed bushes and cookie-cutter homes, she preferred to live anonymously. She spent her days tending to her rose garden, sipping tea on her porch, and occasionally chatting with friendly neighbors. Few people knew about her distinguished past. She didn't flaunt it, nor did she feel the need to remind anyone. For Eleanor, retirement meant trading gavels for gardening tools and finding peace in simplicity. The contrast between Karen and Eleanor couldn't have been starker. Where Karen thrived on control and structure, Eleanor valued calmness and flexibility. Their paths rarely crossed, save for the occasional nod during morning walks. Still, the 2 women existed in the same orbit, bound together by the shared geography of their little corner of the world. Life in the neighborhood ticked along smoothly until one fateful afternoon when events unfolded that would shake the community to its core. What started as an ordinary day quickly spiraled into something neither Karen nor Eleanor could have anticipated. Little did anyone know that a medical emergency, a power struggle over HOA rules, and a surprising twist of fate were about to collide in ways that would leave lasting impressions on everyone involved. As the sun shone brightly overhead, casting long shadows across freshly mowed lawns, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to the residents, their seemingly idyllic community was about to become the stage for a drama that would challenge notions of authority, empathy, and human connection. And at the center of it all stood Karen, whose unwavering commitment to enforcing the rules would soon put her face to face with someone whose very presence commanded respect, not just within the neighborhood, but across the entire country. On what seemed like just another sunny afternoon, the tranquility of the neighborhood was interrupted by an unexpected turn of events. Just as Eleanor Thompson was outside in her garden, carefully pruning her beloved rose bushes, the air smelled sweet with the fragrance of blooming flowers, and birds chirped cheerfully in the background. It was the kind of peaceful moment Eleanor cherished most since retiring from public life. But as she bent down to pick up a stray leaf, a sudden wave of discomfort washed over her. At first, she brushed it off, thinking it might be fatigue or dehydration from working in the sun. However, within minutes, the sensation grew stronger. Her chest tightened, making it hard to breathe, and a dull pain radiated through her body. Dizziness followed, causing her to stumble slightly as she tried to steady herself against her gardening tools. Eleanor knew something wasn't right. Despite her calm demeanor, years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and they were screaming for help. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. Her voice shook as she explained her symptoms to the operator, who assured her that help was on the way. Within moments, the distant sound of sirens pierced the quiet afternoon air, growing louder as an ambulance sped toward her home. The paramedics arrived quickly, their faces focused and professional. They assessed Eleanor's condition right away, suspecting a possible heart attack based on her symptoms. Time was critical, so they prepared to load her into the ambulance without delay. As they worked efficiently to stabilize her, one of the paramedics parked the ambulance partially on the curb near Eleanor's driveway to ensure quick access to the stretcher. Unbeknownst to them, Karen Miller had been watching the entire scene unfold from across the street. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, her eyes narrowing as she observed the ambulance's position. To Karen, this wasn't just a medical emergency, it was a clear violation of HOA Rule 14b, which explicitly prohibited vehicles from obstructing sidewalks or driveways. In her mind, rules were non-negotiable, no matter the situation. Her irritation mounted as she watched the paramedics move back and forth between the house and the ambulance, completely ignoring the parking infraction. How dare they disregard the regulations that kept the neighborhood orderly? Someone needed to step in, and if no one else would do it, then Karen certainly would. Grabbing her clipboard, she marched across the street, ready to confront the offenders head-on. Meanwhile, inside the ambulance, Eleanor lay on the stretcher, struggling to stay calm despite the chaos around her. She could hear muffled voices outside, but couldn't make out what was being said. All she wanted was to get to the hospital as quickly as possible. Every second felt like an eternity, and the last thing she needed was any kind of delay. But little did she know, a confrontation was brewing just feet away. A clash of priorities that would test the limits of logic, compassion, and common sense. As Karen approached the scene, determination etched onto her face. The tension in the air became palpable. Neighbors began peeking out of their windows, curious about the commotion. What started as a routine response to a medical emergency was about to take a dramatic turn, setting the stage for a confrontation that none of them would soon forget. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to stabilize Justice Eleanor Thompson. After a series of tests and treatments, they confirmed that she had suffered a mild heart attack. Fortunately, thanks to the paramedics' efforts, and despite the delay caused by Karen, Eleanor was now out of immediate danger. She was moved to a private room, where she rested while her condition continued to improve under careful monitoring. News of the incident spread like wildfire beyond the neighborhood. Social media posts about the confrontation went viral, sparking debates across online platforms. Local news stations jumped on the story, eager to cover the unusual clash between an HOA enforcer and emergency responders. Reporters flocked to the community, setting up cameras outside Eleanor's house and knocking on doors in search of interviews. The phrase HOA Karen became a trending topic, with memes and jokes flooding the internet. Karen, overwhelmed by the sudden attention, retreated into her home. Phones rang nonstop at her house, but she refused to answer. Journalists camped outside her door, shouting questions through her mailbox slot. "Why did you block the ambulance?" One reporter called out. "Do you regret your actions?" asked another. Karen pulled the curtains shut and turned off her phone, trying to escape the storm brewing around her. But no matter how hard she tried, there was no hiding from the scrutiny. Justice Thompson, on the other hand, handled the media frenzy with grace. Despite her fragile state, she agreed to hold a press conference from her hospital bed. Surrounded by soft lighting and a bouquet of flowers sent by well-wishers, she addressed the public with the same poise and wisdom that had defined her career. Cameras clicked and rolled as reporters leaned forward, hanging on her every word. "I want to start by thanking the first responders who acted swiftly to ensure my safety," Eleanor began, her voice steady but warm. "Their professionalism and dedication are commendable." She paused briefly, allowing her gratitude to sink in before continuing. "However, I also recognize that this incident has sparked important conversations about priorities, not just within our community, but in society as a whole." She spoke candidly about the confrontation, acknowledging Karen's role without naming her directly. "While I understand the importance of maintaining order, especially in shared spaces like neighborhoods, we must always remember that rules exist to serve people. They should never overshadow compassion or common sense. In moments of crisis, human lives must come first. Her words resonated deeply, not only with those in the room, but also with viewers watching from home. Many praised her ability to rise above the situation, using it as an opportunity to teach rather than condemn. Others admired her calm demeanor, noting how rare it was for someone in her position to respond with such humility and understanding. By the end of the press conference, Eleanor had transformed what could have been a divisive moment into a lesson on empathy and perspective. Back in the neighborhood, reactions to Eleanor's remarks varied. Some residents felt inspired, vowing to approach conflicts with more patience and kindness. Others grew defensive, arguing that rules were necessary to maintain structure and fairness. Tensions simmered beneath the surface as neighbors debated whether Karen's actions warranted forgiveness or punishment. The HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss the fallout. Members argued passionately about how to handle the situation. Should they issue a formal apology on behalf of the community, or should they distance themselves from Karen entirely? Opinions were divided, reflecting the broader divide among residents. As the community grappled with the aftermath, Karen found herself wrestling with her own emotions. She replayed Eleanor's words over and over in her mind, unable to shake the feeling that she had let everyone down, including herself. For the first time in years, she questioned whether her strict adherence to rules had gone too far. And though she didn't yet know how to make amends, she realized that change would have to start with her. As the ambulance sped away, its siren fading into the distance, the neighborhood buzzed with a mix of shock, disbelief, and quiet outrage. The confrontation between Karen and the paramedics had left everyone unsettled, but it wasn't over yet. Neighbors who had been watching from their windows or standing on their porches began to gather in small clusters, whispering furiously about what they'd just witnessed. Some were angry at Karen for delaying the ambulance. Others were simply baffled by her actions. Karen herself stood frozen in the middle of the street, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. Her face was flushed, partly from embarrassment, and partly from the weight of what she'd just done. She tried to convince herself that she had acted out of principle, that rules existed for a reason, but even she couldn't fully ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut. Something about this situation felt off. It was then that Mark, a neighbor known for his level-headedness, stepped forward. He had been quietly observing the scene unfold and finally decided to intervene. Walking up to Karen, he said firmly but not unkindly, "Karen, do you even realize who's in that ambulance?" Karen blinked, startled by the question. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with defensiveness. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's Justice Eleanor Thompson. You know, the retired Supreme Court judge. She served on the highest court in the country. She's shaped laws that affect all of us." For a moment, Karen just stared at him, her mouth slightly open. The name sounded familiar, but she hadn't connected it to the woman being loaded into the ambulance. Suddenly, the gravity of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. A Supreme Court judge, a national figure, had been lying on that stretcher, fighting for her life, while Karen lectured paramedics about parking violations. The absurdity of it washed over her, leaving her momentarily speechless. The crowd around them grew quieter as Mark's words sank in. Even those who had initially sided with Karen now looked uneasy. One woman whispered, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know it was her." Another neighbor shook his head and muttered, "This is going to blow up big time." Sensing the shift in mood, Karen stammered, trying to defend herself. "Even judges have to follow the rules," she said weakly, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. But her words fell flat. No one responded, not because they agreed with her, but because it was clear that any further argument would only dig her deeper into an already precarious hole. Meanwhile, phones were already buzzing throughout the neighborhood. Someone had snapped photos of the confrontation and posted them online, along with a caption describing how an HOA enforcer had delayed an ambulance carrying a critically ill patient. Within minutes, social media lit up with reactions. Comments ranged from outrage, "Are you kidding me?" to dark humor, "Guess we know where bureaucracy goes too far." Local news outlets picked up the story almost immediately, eager to cover the bizarre incident. Back on the street, the neighbors continued discussing what had happened. Some expressed sympathy for Karen, acknowledging that she likely hadn't meant harm. Others were less forgiving, calling her behavior selfish and reckless. As tempers flared and opinions clashed, the once peaceful suburb felt more like a battleground of ideologies. Through it all, Karen remained rooted to the spot, her mind racing. She replayed the events in her head. The paramedics' pleas, the sound of the siren, the frail figure on the stretcher, and realized something uncomfortable. She had let her obsession with rules blind her to the bigger picture. This wasn't about enforcing guidelines anymore. It was about humanity. And somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that. By the time evening fell, the neighborhood had transformed. What had started as a quiet afternoon filled with gardening and routine chores had turned into a day none of them would soon forget. For Karen, the fallout was only beginning. But for now she stood alone, grappling with the consequences of her actions, and wondering if she could ever make things right. Karen strode across the street with the confidence of someone who believed she was on a mission of utmost importance. Her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand, she planted herself firmly between the paramedics and the ambulance, blocking their path. The paramedics paused, glancing at each other in confusion before turning their attention to Karen. "This is completely unacceptable," Karen announced loudly, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of activity. "You're violating HOA Rule 14B. You cannot park like this. It's against the regulations." She pointed emphatically at the ambulance, which was partially resting on the curb, its back doors wide open as medical equipment was loaded inside. One of the paramedics, a young man named Jake, stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. "Ma'am," he said patiently, "we have a critical patient here. We need to get her to the hospital immediately. Every second counts." But Karen wasn't swayed. If anything, her resolve hardened. "Rules are rules," she snapped, jabbing her clipboard toward him for emphasis. "If you don't move the vehicle, I'll have no choice but to report this to the HOA board." Her tone left no room for negotiation, as if the mere mention of the HOA carried the weight of an unbreakable law. The paramedics exchanged frustrated glances. They had seen difficult situations before, panicked family members, traffic delays, even bad weather. But never had they encountered someone more concerned about parking violations than the life of a patient. Another paramedic, Lisa, tried reasoning with Karen. "Ma'am, we understand your concerns, but this is an emergency. We're trying to save someone's life here." Karen shook her head stubbornly. "And I'm trying to maintain order in this community. There's a process for everything. Surely you can find another way to load the stretcher without breaking the rules." Justice Eleanor Thompson, lying on the stretcher inside the ambulance, could hear fragments of the argument drifting into her ears. Though her vision was blurry and her breathing labored, she recognized Karen's voice instantly. It was the same clipped, authoritative tone that often echoed through neighborhood meetings. Eleanor couldn't believe what was happening. Was this woman really prioritizing some obscure HOA guideline over her health? Summoning what little strength she had left, Eleanor raised her voice weakly. "Please, let them do their job," she managed to say, though her words came out faint and strained. A few of the neighbors standing nearby turned their heads toward the sound, whispering among themselves. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed annoyed by Karen's antics. Jake leaned closer to Karen, lowering his voice slightly in an attempt to appeal to her sense of reason. "Look, Mom, I get it. You care about the neighborhood. But right now, there's a person, a human being, who needs urgent medical attention. Do you really want to stand in the way of that?" For a brief moment, doubt flickered across Karen's face. She glanced at the ambulance, then at the stretcher where Eleanor lay pale and fragile. For all her bluster, Karen wasn't heartless. Deep down, she knew that lives mattered more than rules. Yet pride and habit held her rooted to the spot. Admitting she was wrong felt like conceding defeat, something Karen rarely did. The standoff stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Neighbors began gathering around, drawn by the escalating tension. Some stood silently, unsure of what to do, while others started murmuring disapproving comments under their breath. One elderly man muttered, "This is ridiculous. Let them go." Finally, after what seemed like endless minutes, Karen relented, but not gracefully. With a huff, she stepped aside, muttering something about how people these days had no respect for authority or proper procedure. As soon as she moved, the paramedics sprang into action, pushing the stretcher into the ambulance and slamming the doors shut. The siren roared back to life, and within seconds, the vehicle sped off toward the hospital, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a stunned crowd of onlookers. As the ambulance disappeared down the street, Karen stood frozen, her clipboard dangling limply at her side. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain, almost shaken. What had she just done? Had she truly put rules above humanity? The questions lingered in her mind, gnawing at her conscience, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Weeks turned into months, and while the neighborhood began to settle back into its usual rhythm, the ripple effects of Karen's actions continued to linger. The once pristine streets now carried a subtle tension, an undercurrent of unease that hadn't fully dissipated. Some neighbors still whispered about that day when they thought Karen wasn't listening, their voices tinged with judgment. Others, however, had softened, recognizing that holding on to anger wouldn't solve anything. Karen herself had undergone a quiet transformation. Gone was the clipboard-wielding enforcer who patrolled the streets with an unyielding glare. In her place stood a quieter, more introspective woman who seemed almost hesitant to leave her house. When she did venture out, it was with a newfound humility. She no longer corrected people for minor infractions like slightly overgrown grass or mismatched curtains. Instead, she offered small smiles and polite greetings, testing the waters of reconciliation one interaction at a time. Her efforts weren't always met with warmth. Some neighbors ignored her completely, refusing to acknowledge her presence. Others gave curt nods, their expressions unreadable. But there were moments of grace, too, like when Mrs. Puddle, the elderly woman who lived 3 doors down, invited Karen over for tea. It was a simple gesture, yet it meant the world to Karen. Over steaming cups of chamomile, they talked about everything except the incident. For the first time in months, Karen felt a flicker of belonging. The HOA board also made strides toward healing the community. They organized a neighborhood cleanup event, encouraging residents to come together for a shared purpose. Flyers went up on bulletin boards, inviting everyone to participate. At first, turnout was sparse, with many unsure if they wanted to engage. But as the morning progressed, more people showed up, some reluctantly, others eager to reconnect. Together, they planted flowers along the sidewalks, painted faded benches, and cleared debris from communal spaces. Slowly, laughter replaced awkward silences, and conversations flowed more naturally. Despite these positive changes, Karen knew she couldn't move forward without addressing the person most affected by her actions, Justice Eleanor Thompson. One crisp autumn afternoon, Karen mustered the courage to visit Eleanor's home. Her heart raced as she approached the front door, rehearsing what she would say in her head. Would Eleanor even agree to see her, or would she turn her away? To Karen's relief, Eleanor answered the door with a warm smile. "Hello, Karen," she said gently, stepping aside to invite her in. The interior of the house was cozy, filled with books and photographs that hinted at a life rich with experiences. They sat down in the living room, where sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden hues across the furniture. Karen fidgeted nervously before finally speaking. "Justice Thompson." "Eleanor," she corrected herself. "I came here today to apologize. What I did was wrong, and I'm so sorry. I let my obsession with rules blind me to what truly mattered: you, your health, and your humanity. I'll carry that regret with me forever." Eleanor listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. When Karen finished, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for coming, Karen. Apologies aren't easy, but they're a step toward growth. And believe me, I understand how easy it is to get caught up in our own perspectives." She paused, then added with a gentle smile, "But forgiveness is possible, for both of us." Their conversation lasted for over an hour, covering topics far beyond the incident. They spoke about their lives, their passions, and their hopes for the future. By the end of it, Karen felt lighter, as though a weight she'd been carrying had begun to lift. Eleanor, too, seemed pleased with the exchange, offering words of encouragement and wisdom that stayed with Karen long after she left. Word of their meeting spread quickly through the neighborhood, sparking curiosity and admiration. Many saw it as a turning point, a sign that wounds could heal and bridges could be rebuilt. Inspired by this act of reconciliation, other neighbors began reaching out to one another, mending strained relationships and fostering a renewed sense of unity. Though scars remained, the community emerged stronger than before, united not by perfection but by imperfection. They learned that mistakes, no matter how painful, could lead to growth, if only people were willing to listen, reflect, and change. And for Karen, the journey of redemption had just begun. Guided by the lessons of compassion and humanity she now carried with her every day. The fallout from the incident hit the neighborhood hard, and Karen bore the brunt of it. The HOA board convened for an emergency meeting at the community center, a space usually reserved for holiday parties and gardening workshops. This time, however, the atmosphere was tense. Chairs scraped against the floor as members shuffled in, their faces grim. Whispers filled the room before the meeting officially began, everyone speculating about what would happen next. When the discussion finally started, opinions were sharply divided. Some board members defended Karen, arguing that she had simply been doing her job, albeit perhaps too zealously. "She's always been passionate about keeping our community orderly," one member said. "Yes, her timing was poor, but let's not throw her under the bus entirely." Others weren't so forgiving. "This isn't just about bad timing." Another member shot back. "Her actions delayed medical care for someone who could have died. And not just anyone, a Supreme Court judge. Do you realize how this makes us look? Like we prioritize rules over human decency." The debate grew heated, with voices rising until the chairperson called for order. After hours of deliberation, the board reached a decision. Karen would be stripped of her role as head of the compliance committee. While she wouldn't be expelled from the HOA altogether, her responsibilities would be significantly reduced. It was a compromise meant to appease both sides, though no one seemed entirely satisfied. For Karen, the verdict stung deeply. Losing her position felt like losing a part of her identity. For years, she had prided herself on being the backbone of the neighborhood, the person who kept everything running smoothly. Now she was seen as the villain, the woman whose inflexibility had nearly cost someone their life. Neighbors avoided eye contact when they passed her on the street. Once friendly faces turned cold, and some even crossed the road to avoid speaking to her. The isolation weighed heavily on her shoulders. But the consequences didn't stop there. News outlets continued to cover the story, turning it into a national talking point. Late-night comedians joked about HOA Karen during their monologues, while opinion pieces debated whether strict rule enforcement was ever justified. Social media users dissected every detail, sharing memes and commentary that mocked Karen's behavior. Even local businesses got involved. A nearby cafe temporarily renamed its most bitter coffee blend Karen's Special Blend, as a tongue-in-cheek nod to the controversy. Amid the chaos, Justice Thompson remained a beacon of calm. Her press conference had struck a chord with people nationwide, earning her praise for her wisdom and grace. Letters poured into the hospital from strangers thanking her for reminding them of the importance of compassion. One letter came from a teacher in Ohio who wrote, "Your words inspired me to talk to my students about empathy. Thank you for showing us all what true leadership looks like." As the days turned into weeks, Karen retreated further into solitude. She stopped attending HOA meetings, avoided walking her dog during peak hours, and spent most evenings alone on her porch, staring at the neatly trimmed hedges she once policed so fiercely. Her clipboard gathered dust in a drawer, unused and forgotten. Nights were the hardest. She lay awake replaying the confrontation in her mind, imagining alternate scenarios where she might have acted differently. What if she had stepped aside immediately? What if she had asked questions instead of making demands? Regret gnawed at her relentlessly. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Karen found herself reflecting on something Eleanor had said during the press conference. Rules exist to serve people. They should never overshadow compassion or common sense. At first, those words had felt like a rebuke, but now they resonated differently. Maybe they weren't meant to shame her, but to guide her, to remind her that change was possible, even after mistakes. Determined to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, Karen decided to take small steps toward repairing her relationship with the community. She started by apologizing to her closest neighbors, admitting fault without making excuses. "I know I messed up," she told them sincerely. "I hope someday you'll forgive me." To her surprise, some accepted her apology graciously, while others remained guarded but polite. Though the road ahead promised to be long and challenging, Karen began to see glimmers of hope. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that redemption was possible, not through grand gestures, but through humility, patience, and a willingness to learn. The neighborhood, too, showed signs of healing, slowly moving past the incident and focusing on rebuilding trust. But everyone knew that scars would remain, and lessons learned. Months after the incident, the neighborhood had transformed in subtle yet meaningful ways. The once rigid adherence to HOA rules softened, giving way to a more balanced approach that prioritized kindness and understanding over strict enforcement. While the rules still existed, they were, after all, part of what made the community feel orderly. They no longer dictated every interaction or overshadowed the importance of human connection. Karen became a different person altogether. She traded her clipboard for gardening gloves and spent her mornings tending to her own yard instead of critiquing others. Her roses, which she had neglected during her years as the self-appointed enforcer, began to bloom beautifully, earning compliments from neighbors who walked by. One day, Mark stopped to admire them and said with a grin, "Looks like you've got a green thumb now, Karen." It was one of the first genuine smiles she'd seen from him since the incident, and it filled her with quiet pride. But perhaps the most significant change in Karen was her willingness to listen. She started attending HOA meetings again, not as the head of the compliance committee, but as an active participant who offered thoughtful input rather than rigid demands. When disagreements arose, she suggested compromises instead of ultimatums. Slowly, people began to trust her again, seeing her not as the rule Nazi, but as someone genuinely invested in making the neighborhood better for everyone. Justice Eleanor Thompson played a role in this transformation too. Though she preferred to keep a low profile, she occasionally attended community events, always ready with a kind word or piece of advice. Her presence reminded residents of the importance of perspective and empathy. During one such gathering, a potluck dinner at the community center, she gave a short speech that resonated deeply with those in attendance. "We're all doing our best," she said, standing near a table laden with homemade dishes. "Sometimes we make mistakes, and sometimes we hurt each other, even when we don't mean to. But what matters is how we respond to those moments. Do we let them divide us, or do we use them as opportunities to grow closer?" Her words hung in the air, prompting nods and murmurs of agreement. By the end of the evening, conversations buzzed with plans for future projects, a shared vegetable garden, a book club, and even a mentorship program pairing older residents with younger families. Karen took these initiatives to heart. She volunteered to help organize the vegetable garden, working alongside neighbors she had once barely spoken to. As they dug soil and planted seeds together, barriers melted away. Laughter replaced tension, and friendships blossomed where none had existed before. Even Mrs. Patel, who had initially been skeptical of Karen's sincerity, admitted one afternoon while watering tomatoes, "You've changed, Karen. I'm glad." The turning point came on a crisp spring morning when the neighborhood gathered for its annual Easter egg hunt. Children darted across lawns, their laughter echoing through the streets, while adults chatted amiably under colorful banners strung between trees. For the first time in years, Karen felt truly included. She wasn't just tolerated, she was welcomed. When little Emma, Mark's daughter, ran up to her holding a basket overflowing with plastic eggs, Karen knelt down and smiled. "Wow, look at all those treasures," she exclaimed. Emma giggled and handed her a bright pink egg. "This one's for you, Karen." It was a small moment, but it meant the world to Karen. That simple gesture symbolized acceptance, the very thing she had feared losing forever. As she stood up, clutching the tiny egg, tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. No one needed to know how much that single act of inclusion touched her. By summer, the neighborhood felt like a different place. People lingered longer on porches, sharing stories and lemonade. Kids rode bikes freely, knowing they were safe among friends. And Karen, she found joy in the little things, helping a neighbor carry groceries, waving hello to passersby, and watching her roses thrive under the sun. One evening, as she sat on her porch sipping tea, Karen reflected on how far she'd come. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been messy, humbling, and often painful, but it had taught her invaluable lessons about compassion, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. Looking around at the vibrant community she now called home, she realized something profound. Rules could guide them, but it was love and understanding that truly held them together. And so, life in the neighborhood continued, not perfectly but authentically. The scars of the past remained, but they served as reminders of growth rather than division. Through it all, Karen emerged not as the woman who blocked an ambulance, but as the woman who learned to open her heart, and in doing so, helped heal her community.